all of not only the corruption in the Trump administration, but even specifically Musk's angle, his version of corruption, his self-dealing, his conflicts of interest, is the theme that ties all this together is that this government is willing and very happy to sacrifice us, our safety, our well-being, our money, and our benefits as taxpayers to benefit themselves. And Musk is a great example of exactly that kind of thing. Just another very explicit version of the ultra rich getting paid off the backs of the rest of us, which, like, you can find examples all over, notably in like the proposed tax cuts, right? Where like Trump's tax cuts are like largely, almost exclusively going to go to the wealthiest Americans and be paid for by the rest of us, like shutting down, like reducing Social Security benefits and shutting down government programs.
And one other thing that we also need to acknowledge is the fact that in a lot of ways, this is just the natural conclusion of something we've been heading towards for a long time.
Yeah.
The fact that the wealthiest Americans have always had an excess of power in our politics, that has been par for the course for the last several decades.
Yeah.
What makes this unique is that for once they're cutting out the middleman.
Yes.
And they're just straight up having the wealthy people go in there and just directly
write themselves
run things,
fucking checks.
all like just in like in broad daylight, basically.
Yes.
Like so one of the things that I think that we need to take from this is that if we ever do get out of this fucking oligarchical, I don't know if that's a word, nightmare, then not only do we need to make sure that this specific thing never happens again, we also need to look at the ways in which oligarchy was present before this.
Yeah.
We need to look at campaign finance reform, and we need to actually be paying attention to websites like Open Secrets that lay out exactly which industries are paying which politicians.
Yeah.
And the politicians that are beholden to industries, clearly, we need to never fucking trust them again, Democrat or Republican.
Yeah. And that's the thing. The original corruption here, we shouldn't forget, from Musk, aside from, bolstering right-wing people on Twitter and stuff like that, was $300 million invested in getting Trump elected.
Exactly.
And to Nathan's point, that is not only the origin of, I shouldn't say the origin, it's the path in to this kind of situation, but it is the inevitable cause of the inevitability of this situation. So over the last, few decades, because Musk has been around for a while, his businesses have received approximately $38 billion in government contracts, loans, subsidies, and tax credits, often at like critical moments throughout their history, and nearly 2/3 of that amount of money they have received over the past 5 years. So it's clear that Musk, as an individual, has benefited greatly from investments by our government, which is not that's not a bad thing, especially especially in the form of like contracts or subsidies for social goods and stuff. Like, these are things that make a lot of sense for our government to invest in. Like, if NASA requires outsourcing, rocket launches to SpaceX, and there are contracts to do that, or, then like, okay, great. As long as there was a process for evaluating potential contractors that was fair and unbiased and accounted appropriately for their ability to deliver the quality goods that taxpayers deserve, all the more power to them. Subsidies and tax credits for things like electric vehicles that are high quality and benefit people and like help benefit all of us by moving us towards a more green transportation system. These are like reasonable things for the government to do. And so just the fact that Musk has built his businesses, there's been a lot of reporting around like how much his businesses have benefited from government investment. just that fact alone is not necessarily a problem. It's when you combine it with all of the other factors that are present here when it becomes not only hypocritical, but rife with corruption.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's socialism for me, but not for thee, basically. Or, government aid. And another thing that we need to acknowledge beyond just government contracts is we need to look at some of the specific agencies that he has been gutting.
Yes.
And why gutting those specific agencies represents a clear conflict of interest. Because remember that meeting in the Oval Office where he basically said, oh, well, if I have any conflicts of interest, I guess I will recuse myself. It's like, okay, well, bro, I found some conflicts of interest.
Yeah.
All right. So first off, according to a fact sheet that was put together by the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Jamie Raskin, the Department of Labor, which oversees the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, which is one of the departments that has been severely cut and gutted under Doge, it had over, alongside the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, they had over a dozen open investigations into Tesla and SpaceX that were alleging unfair labor practices, safety violations, and discriminatory work practices. Another agency that he has been gutting, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Consumers have submitted over 300 complaints to the CFPB regarding specifically Tesla. And 66 of these complaints were submitted in just the last year alone. USAID. The Inspector General, which, by the way, was fired by Trump, but prior to being fired by Trump, had actually launched a probe into Starlink satellite terminals that were provided to the government of Ukraine. So they were also investigating Musk. The Department of Transportation, which oversees national highways, had several open investigations into Tesla. The FAA had recently ordered SpaceX to carry out a formal investigation into the loss of a Starship vehicle during a test flight, and had previously ordered over $630,000 in civil penalties against SpaceX. I'm not done.
Yeah.
The U.S. Department of Agriculture had a probe into Elon Musk's Neuralink. The Environmental Protection Agency had multiple lawsuits against Tesla. The Federal Election Commission had a number of complaints filed during the election cycle that were pertaining to Elon Musk's America PAC. The Department of the Interior, which oversees Fish and Wildlife Services, had repeatedly clashed with Elon Musk regarding some of his SpaceX launch sites in Texas. Mm-hmm. The Department of Defense. SpaceX had repeatedly failed to comply with federal reporting protocols aimed specifically at protecting state secrets. The Department of Justice. The Department of Justice had filed a 2023 lawsuit against SpaceX alleging discrimination against hiring asylum seekers and refugees. The Security and Exchange Commission sued X in January of 2025, alleging that Musk had misled shareholders about his Twitter stocks in 2020. Mm-hmm. And finally, the Department of Government Ethics, days after members of Congress had requested that they investigate Elon Musk's conflicts of interest, the director of the Office of Government Ethics was fired by Donald Trump.
Yeah.
So there are multiple conflicts of interest in here, and most of these agencies are ones that have either been severely gutted or basically taken control of. And when you put it all together, the bullshit about, well, if I have a conflict of interest, I'll recuse myself, it really rings hollow at this point.
Especially because Trump has laid the groundwork for this corruption by firing the director of the Office of Government Ethics, as well as at least 17 inspectors general, whose literal jobs it is to go and find conflicts of interest and assess them. And so it totally rings hollow, Nathan. You're totally right to say, like, well, if there are conflicts of interest, we'll find them and we'll protect them. When you fired the people whose jobs it is to find and protect us from conflicts of interest.
And don't forget that one inspector general that was fired after basically putting out a report saying, hey, millions of dollars worth of food that is supposed to be used by USAID is at risk of basically rotting in the next few weeks if we don't do something about it. And the Trump administration was like, okay, great, you're fired.
Yeah, exactly. I want to dive a little deeper into one of these examples because I think the removal of watchdogs, and the bullying of agencies, regulatory agencies that are designed to protect us, is one of the angles of Musk's corruption that I think we should dig into. There are also others. We should talk about his self-dealing, which is pretty clearly in place here. So like getting contracts for his companies from the government, as well as just literally holding an auto show on the fucking White House lawn.
That can't be legal. That can't be legal.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about the FAA and SpaceX. So I think you mentioned this one, Nathan. So the SpaceX had a Starship, which is kind of cool that we have starships. I will say Elon Musk is good at branding shit, which exploded in January, which, raining debris down on the Caribbean. And as a result, the FAA temporarily grounded the rocket program of SpaceX while they're ordering this investigation. And as Nathan mentioned, levied a series of fines. The agency's chief counsel at the time said, quote, "Safety drives everything we do at the FAA." And the fines were specifically for, quote, "failure of a company to comply with the safety requirements will result in consequences," which were these fines. So they have basically repeatedly defied safety protocols that are required to avoid fines and allow your flights into the air. As in response to this, Musk had called for the chief of the FAA, Mike Whitaker, to resign. The day after Trump's inauguration, he did. A full 4 years before the end of his term. And so now Musk and his team have significant influence over the FAA, including firing a bunch of people, and is in a position to directly influence the kind of safety regulation that gets enforced against SpaceX. So specifically, the Office of Commercial Space Transportation is a small office that's responsible for all of the licensing and safety protocols, which is mainly public safety, right? This is not like we're protecting, the investment in rockets. This is making sure that debris doesn't rain down on our homes and our cars and our kids, right? And so this one agency is like responsible for the public safety and licensing commercial rocket launches, and they have been significantly understaffed. So even Musk doesn't have to fucking undo regulation. He can just gut these agencies of the people that do the enforcing. And so at the same time as like he's been going after this agency, they've seen like a 6-fold increase in launches over the past 6 years, right? From 26 in 2019 to 157 last year, with SpaceX leading the pack among launches, with only 160 people to oversee the safety of these flights, right? And so they're responsible for like evaluating the risk to public safety, the potential harms associated with a launch, as well as potential environmental damage, and interference with other like air travel and space travel. And typically this process to evaluate a single launch takes 5 months because it's so complex. And so as a result, like they're just not able to keep up with the amount of launches, and therefore the effectiveness of this regulation and protecting public safety is reduced. So just like I think like a good kind of deeper dive example into the way that Musk is able to skirt around public safety legislation by gutting these agencies that enforce those regulations.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's also a bunch of examples of self-dealing with Trump and the Trump administration and Musk. So obviously we mentioned like literally having Teslas on the White House lawn talking about how big the computers were. It's quote, "It's all computer" from Trump.
And I find it amazing how on the campaign trail before Musk joined with
Yeah.
Trump was regularly talking about how terrible electric cars were.
Yeah.
Like remember when he had that weird thing about I don't know, being in an electric car and there being sharks in the water or some shit. I don't even remember what the fuck it was about. But like he regularly chastised the idea of electric cars. Like he made fun of the fact that you do have to wait for a while for them to charge.
Mm-hmm.
And just all of a sudden he flips on a fucking dime, which just shows you how Trump's only principles are, do you make me feel good?
Yeah.
If you make me feel good, I'll praise whatever the fuck you want.
Totally. Yeah. And to that point, the turnaround of like the Republicans in general has been so remarkable on electric vehicles. Like at one point recently, the State Department, it came out that the State Department was evaluating a award to Tesla for a $400 million government contract to produce armored electric vehicles to transport diplomats. Now, on its face, again, this is another example. Like, not the weirdest thing in the world. Like, armored electric vehicles sounds good. We like electric vehicles. You know, the fucked up part is that it's like a default contract to Tesla. Although, you know, Tesla's a major EV manufacturer, so like maybe not the craziest thing in the world. When this came out, though, that it hadn't gone through like the typical channels of evaluating, like subcontracting this work in order to ensure that they could produce what was necessary, right? The State Department issued a statement saying that the purchase was on pause and that it actually started under the Biden administration. Oh, no conflict of interest there, except for this. That statement by the State Department was intentionally misleading because what had started under the Biden administration was a $483,000 investigation into potentially being able to have armored electric vehicles. And so under the Trump State Department, that was bumped up to $400 million and a contract for those vehicles. Now, the State Department did say that it was now on pause, but that's also partially because the military was like, we don't want these. So another example of self-dealing and a clear conflict of interest.
Yeah. And look, on one hand, I guess it's kind of nice that Republicans are no longer trying to say that if you even touch an electric car, you're just going to turn gay.
Sure.
But like, you know, we also need to make sure that the electric cars that we are creating are decent ones and have high standards. And the fact of the matter is, the fact that various different regulatory agencies that specifically are there to make sure that the products that are put out there are safe and fulfill a certain minimal level of standards, the fact that those very government agencies are the ones that he is targeting doesn't exactly inspire confidence. Totally. So look, this isn't me being anti-electric vehicle. I am pro-electric vehicle. I love the idea of electric vehicles. And the fact that I love the idea of electric vehicles is why this pisses me off so much.
Exactly.
Because this is stifling it. This is stifling electric vehicles. You are destroying the brand of electric vehicles. All right. Yeah. I know a lot of people. Just today, I was out with my wife. We were on a lunch date with our kid, and I walked by a Tesla, and it had this sign in the back that said, "I bought this before I knew he was an asshole."
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's the thing. You've destroyed the Tesla brand, and you've destroyed the brand of electric cars among the people that most want to do something to actually help the environment.
Totally. Yeah, and to your point, it's not at all about the quality of these products. It's about the fact that we need safety standards, and we need those standards to be enforced, and we need a government that's able to independently evaluate the best people to do a job, not someone who is able to, at their whim, grant themselves hundreds of $1 million in federal contracts. So along those lines, Starlink, which is a subsidiary of SpaceX and also owned by Musk, has been has been like a driving force of a lot of this self-dealing in the government. So Musk has publicly called for federal agencies to adopt Starlink or to award Starlink grants in order to like install it in the government. Now, there are places where Starlink might make a lot of sense. Like there were multiple federal agencies that were exploring the use of Starlink for internet access in places where, they couldn't get access to internet otherwise. You think like disaster zones, right? It's easy to set up. It's really fast. It's actually a really high quality product. There's like a lot of reasons why they might use it. And so like, there were already federal agencies evaluating this thing. But Musk's pressure to get the government to use this and his forced implementation of this via Doge starts to raise some questions, because in the example of one agency, the General Services Administration, this is an administrative agency. They have an office building in DC. They're not going to disaster zones. They already have internet. They have had Starlink installed at the behest of the Doge team. Usually, putting in new internet would require security evaluation, evaluation of the business needs, a procurement plan, like the kinds of things that make sure we don't waste money and we don't expose our government to cyber security risks. Well, this system was installed within a couple of days of the Doge team in getting into place, which means that really none of that due diligence could have taken place. And again, this agency already fucking has internet. So it's just a fucking contract to line Musk's pockets. Similarly, there was a SpaceX engineer who is a member of the Doge team, who had instructed FAA employees at the headquarters in DC to, quote, immediately start work on a program to deploy thousands of the company's Starlink satellite terminals to support the national airspace system, and then threatened those employees if anyone impeded the implementation of this work with losing their jobs. So basically, like, just put this system in place or lose your job. Similarly, the company has been attempting to replace a Verizon contract at the Federal Aviation Administration with a Starlink system instead. So it's a $2.4 billion contract that was awarded through the standard process to Verizon in order to like rebuild the infrastructure at the FAA's traffic control system. And on a whim, Musk has pressured the FAA to open that contract up to Starlink as well. And so they are literally like now evaluating the incorporation of Starlink instead of or in addition to Verizon. So literally just adding tons of potential cost to the program just so that they can use Starlink. On top of that, the Doge and Musk have been attempting to elbow their way into a Biden program, which was designed to deliver broadband internet service to underserved and rural areas. Now, this program has not had a ton of success, right? Throughout the Biden administration, it has not delivered any internet yet to anyone. It's plagued with a lot of red tape. Partially that reason is because it needs to provide a certain amount of reliability, a certain like a low cost option for low income users and stuff like that. But Starlink is attempting to muscle its way in on this $43 billion program, even though it at this point can't meet the reliability standards and isn't proposing a low cost option. And yet the Commerce Department is investigating ways that it can work around the rules of the law in order to enable Starlink to get contracts to provide this broadband internet. So yet another way that his position in government is he's directly leveraging it in order to enrich himself. And normally, an inspector general would be investigating this and would call it out, except Trump fired them because he was laying the groundwork for this corruption from the beginning. One last thing I wanted to call out, because I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, the theme of this is that Musk is very happily and willing to endanger all of us, compromise our benefits of the government in order to enrich himself by moving quickly and blitzing the government. I did want to call out another example of this at the National Labor Relations Board. So this is another casualty of Doge and its incredibly reckless and potentially, corrupt behavior. So the National Labor Relations Board investigates and adjudicates complaints about unfair labor practices. We've talked about them. They are one of the agencies that's been gutted by Doge. They also have in their systems a significant amount of highly sensitive and confidential and proprietary data, including information about employees that are attempting to form unions and proprietary business information. Things that experts think could be abused, including records of private companies with cases before the agency, including potentially damaging testimony, information about private information about union leadership, as well as legal strategies and internal data on competitors. Some of those competitors are competitors of Musk and SpaceX, right? So there's a ton of super sensitive information here. And a whistleblower recently came out during a testimony before Congress and described the way that Doge came in to this, to the NLRB. So basically, Doge engineers came in. They were granted the highest level of access beyond pretty much any other single individual in the organization, right? And all of a sudden, the technical staff at the NLRB started to notice spikes in data leaving the NLRB, right? Again, this highly sensitive data that could directly benefit Elon Musk, and a lot of other people, right? The whistleblower described this data as 10 gigabytes or more, the equivalent of a full stack of encyclopedias if it was all text files. So a significant amount of data was leaving the NLRB. At the same time, the Doge team was covering their tracks. They were deleting logs from their access to systems. They were removing monitoring tools and deleting records, and basically evasive behavior that a cybersecurity expert described to NPR as being compared to what a criminal or state-sponsored hackers might do in an environment like this. Meanwhile, as they were in there extracting this data, the tech folks at the NLRB started noticing suspicious login attempts from IP addresses in Russia, similar to a cybersecurity attack, right? And so, including one Russian IP address that appeared to have a correct username and password that was created mere minutes before by the Doge engineers. So this is a potential extreme cybersecurity vulnerability and attack that was, as far as we know, halted, but we don't know where this data went, with incredibly sensitive data about about U.S. citizens, our unions, and our companies. And so at the very least, this is incredibly reckless. At the worst, it's espionage. So I think, all of this ties together a combination of Musk's, a combination that exemplifies the Trump administration: recklessness, self-dealing, the destruction of regulatory agencies that protect all of us just because it makes their lives a little bit easier, and just the total willingness to sell out the American people to line their own pockets.